Hey everyone, R. Shawn McBride here with you, joined by Ann Gatty. We're going to be talking about a new era of growth planning for business, right? We've had a lot of changes, COVID-19, all the things around it. And the reality is the way you grow your business, the way you protect your business has changed. Ann and I have been engaged in a project writing a book called Entrepreneur to CEO, which is largely drafted. We've been in the revision process, really tightening things up here. And we're talking about the stages of going from an entrepreneur to CEO. And part of all this is how do you grow and build a business? And what we're seeing right now is a new era of growth planning. So we think the way you plan to grow your business has changed, particularly in light of COVID-19. So, and maybe I'll pass it over to you for a sec and kind of get your thoughts. Why do you think things have changed with growing the businesses? What do people need to be thinking about now?
Well, I do think that resiliency is a major concern at this point. We probably didn't think of it as much, that is a major way to grow value with your business, that your business pretty much has to be bomb-proof at this time. You need to be able to not only say, here's what we're creating, we've got this product line, or we've got this service line that we're able to provide to our clients and customers. Now we need to be thinking about what happens if there is a disruption, what happens if we can't get the supplies from a certain area of the world, or we can't follow the same supply chain that we have had, it gets disrupted, or we can't distribute it. We can't deliver the services the way we had in the past. Maybe that was the most efficient way to deliver the services, but if that is not available because we're shut down or because, people can't come to the store, or there is some disruption, we
Yeah.
can't get the trucks to deliver the services and products that we need, then we have to have alternatives. So
Yeah.
now I do believe that we're going to be looking very strongly at resiliency and being able to assess what is the risk in building a business in this particular business model, maybe strictly on profit margin or strictly on revenue, that we are going to have to look a little differently. And
Yeah.
so that's what we've been talking about.
Right, and I think I watched a panel with some experts, a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying, we may get to the day where public companies are required to trace their supply chains all the way back to the source. That's probably not practical for most small businesses, but you need to think about that. And I think you also need to go back and revisit your profit model, right? So I remember there was a crazy guy in Baltimore. He sold Kias, and he would get on TV and jump around and all. But one of the things he always say is, "We stack them deep and we sell them cheap," right? And so he had this whole line of Kias, and his whole business model was supposed to be based on volume, 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 volume. And I think that certainly has been a valid business model. And I think what we're learning, though, if you look at today, in today's environment, the volume model is not working the same way, right? I mean, particularly would it be restaurants, concerts, sporting events, the whole sector of the economy was largely based on volume, volume, volume is having some real struggles. So I think that brings a new question into your business planning, which is, if there's a shift like this ever again, another virus breaks out, or another social concern, or for whatever reason people are scared, whether it be another terrorist event or whatever, the volume business model really needs to be reevaluated.
Well, I do think it needs to be reevaluated as is if that is the means you have to build your profits and build your revenue. And I do think that in this time, a lot of people, when there is disruption, will be looking at ways to cut costs and ways, okay, we can't spend. But this is also a time when you need to say, how can I increase profits? What can
Yep.
I do that allows me to build a profit stream that maybe I didn't have in the past, or that I can pivot and do something totally different? So that's where I do think, Shawn, risk comes into play,
Yep.
and you have to be willing to maybe take risks. I mean, you're going to assess it, but you may have to have a huge pivot. This may be time when you are doing a totally different model. If you
Yes.
find that you no longer can distribute the means that you've done before, or you no longer can get the supplies, or you can't even have the staffing that you had before. So all of
Yeah.
those things play into it.
I think a lot of hard decisions, and I think I'm concerned for a lot of people about having to take two hits, because what I'm seeing is a lot of businesses want to go back to the way things were before
Right.
COVID-19 broke out, for all the setbacks, right? That's the initial gut instinct is let's get back to normal. I keep hearing that phrase, back to normal, back to the new normal. But that's all built on the assumption that the future looks like the past. And I think, like we've discussed in our private conversations and we're talking about here today publicly, we'd love your comments, by the way. If you see this video, drop your comments. We'll love to interact with you on it. But I think the day's coming where the future is not the same as the past. So if you've got a business and you're trying to get back to where you were before, you're going to spend all your time and energy rebuilding to be what you look like before COVID-19, and you're probably going to find out the market has changed, and now you've got to pivot again. So it's better for, I think, a lot of businesses to kind of rip the Band-Aid and do one major pivot here rather than
Well,
have to rebuild and then pivot.
and don't you think, Shawn, that it has to do with customer behavior? The
Yeah.
customer behavior is going to shift a lot too. So you cannot rely on your customers relating to you the same way they did in the past. They may
I think
not feel comfortable coming into your store, or they may not feel comfortable coming into your restaurant for a while. So
yeah.
as you are coming through a major disruption, there's also a period of time where people are reassessing not just the business model, but also reassessing how to interact with your business, how are the clients going to
Well, yeah,
interact.
I think there's a huge piece of that here. And, if you read some of the books, and everybody debates this, whether this number's real or not from science or just made up, but, there's the whole theory that it's 21 days to make a new habit, right? So some period of time and you start new habit formation. Um, that tells us, people have been cooped up for more than 21 days here with COVID-19. So they've not been going to their favorite restaurant for at least 21 days, 30 days, 40 days. They've not been to baseball games. They've not been to football games. They've not watched live sports. They've not gone to certain retail establishments. They've not gone to the beach. They've not traveled. And so I think there are a lot of people longing to go back to it, but does the frequency change? The frequency you go to a restaurant, the
So what
frequency
you're
you go.
saying, what you're saying there is that people have made new habits.
I think it's inevitable, right?
And
I mean,
yeah,
people they
exactly.
got forced to make new
Right.
habits, right? They got forced to figure out how to dine at home. They got forced to do carry out. They got forced to,
They got forced to, you have all the churches online right now.
right. They got forced.
So
They
all
got
these mega churches that are used to having thousands of people coming may see that very different once we reopen.
right, and because some percentage of people are just going to say, "Hey, let's keep
Stay
doing
online.
this."
I like being with my slippers and my coffee.
Right. A lot of us have been using Zoom for business meetings, and we were using it. Many of us were using it before, but the frequency has now increased, right? It's gone more
Right.
mainstream. I mean, I've heard a lot of people who never used Zoom before now are suddenly, they're like, oh, yeah, I've used Zoom, so it's a lot easier, right? Because I would, that's one of the
Well,
options.
how is it affecting you too, Shawn, with doing all these speaking engagements?
Yeah.
They're going to be conferences the same way, or do you have
I,
to say, hey, I'm doing things differently?
oh, yeah. I mean, in fact, interestingly, I have another YouTube channel where I've been working with a lady named Deirdre Watson, who's an event planning expert. And, we've been interviewing people in the events industry. And what we're finding is, it's a radically changed, right? And so a lot of virtual events, people are testing out new technology there. People are being forced to try virtual events in ways they've never done before. So some of that's happening. And so speakers are speaking virtually to some extent. A lot of the live events are canceled. And, one big theme we found there is that costs are going to be a lot higher, right? So if you have
Wow.
live events, people are talking about spacing. Well, hotels are already very expensive. Now you have to potentially space people 6 feet apart in a hotel. Well, you can't get nearly as many people in a conference room. You can't get nearly as many people to an event. You can't have the same networking happy hours, right? So the whole nature of events has changed. Of course, you're probably gonna have to clean and sanitize overnight, which is going to add a whole layer of cost to it. So the game has changed. And you know, maybe 2 years from now, if there's, you know, herd immunity, or if there's, you know, a vaccine or whatever, maybe we start to go back to it. But again, habit formation, 2 years of not going to conferences, and people are going to start questioning it. And people are going to say, well, why can't I just watch the video on my laptop like they've been doing? So I think there's a lot of habit formation happening. And I think we need to be very cognizant of that as business
Absolutely.
owners, that our customers have now changed their habits. They were forced to try new things. And it's not just going to snap back to what it used to be. Some percentage of people are going to say, hey, I don't want to go back that way, you know?
I
And
think that, don't you think that this would be a great time as we're coming up of this particular disruption? And this is not the only disruption that is going to occur. There's lots of natural disasters and things that occur and disrupt businesses.
mhm,
But this is a good time to test and experiment building new relationships as people are coming back out of COVID, and see how do people feel comfortable. Ask your clients, ask your customers, and say, you know, how can we better serve you, and see what they're looking for. Because if they've been building new habits, then you may find that some of those online approaches are going to remain. And so that's something that, you know, I think that speakers, Shawn, is probably, you know, we're looking at webinars, we're
yep,
looking at different ways to deliver the services that we've done in the past, just
yep,
because people are more comfortable with that now.
absolutely. I think it's a world opportunity. I think this is a great opportunity for sales. You know, there's a book out there called Power of Habit, and it talks about people's habits, which, you know, obviously that's very relevant today. And one thing that the author talks about in there is Target spent a great deal of money um, doing tracking and software and other things to figure out how they could determine if a customer might be pregnant. And so, yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense at first, right? But someone at Target years ago figured, probably a decade and a half ago, figured out that if somebody, you know, if a woman becomes pregnant, she's going to realign her buying habits because of this major change, right? You got a kid
Okay.
now, right? So time allocation is different, the way you shop's different, and if Target could build the loyalty to where you start shopping at Target while you're pregnant, and then thereafter, they could build this huge long-term customer relationship, very valuable. And so Target spent a lot of money on it. They, in fact, became so good at it that they had a woman who was living at home with her parents became pregnant, and Target started sending her mailings that indicated she was pregnant before she had told her parents. And her father ended up going to the Target store very angry about Target
Wow.
suggesting that her daughter might be pregnant, blah, blah, blah. Well, come to find out, Target knew before they did
Wow.
from her buying habits, right? They just knew that if certain shifts happen in your buying habits, you start buying certain different products and other things, that would be an indication that a woman's pregnant. And so, um,
Wow.
yeah, and that's just a long way to say people's habits do change with major shifts, right? Target knows it.
Right.
They spent how many ever millions of dollars developing software to say, hey, we want to go after customers when their habits are changing. And we know right now that people's habits are changing,
Drastically changing.
drastically changing. And so um, they're going to do more online. They're going to be able to reach out and do virtual. They have needs, right? You and I know, and one of the things we're helping people with is coming up with their new reality in business, right? How do I realign my business? And a lot of my clients are dealing with that, you know, and that's one of the things I've been busy with the last couple of weeks is, you know, how do we change our capital raising process, you know, and is it realistic to raise money? How do we tweak our business model? Does our business model work with new habits? And I think everybody's got to kind of go and examine how you want to grow in this new environment and make sure that you are prepared for the habit shifts, but then also, like you and I were talking about, deeper, that you can withstand future shocks.
Right. I do think that that's something anybody building a business today needs to look at, how to handle disruption, prepare for disruption, and that it's gonna, and just figure it's gonna occur at some point, and make sure that you have agility to move in whatever direction you need to survive. And again, it's that sustainability that's key. And I think that's one of the things that we have not focused on in building businesses in the past. You know, we've come in, made our
So,
money, and left, and now it's not that way. You and I
well,
know that building value so that it's your business is able to be sold is very important. Or as an entrepreneur, you're coming in and maybe you're just buying a business, building it up, and then selling it. Maybe that's your sweet spot. Or maybe it is that you build a business that you then can hand off or whatever. But you have to have a very clear understanding of all of the elements, from supply to delivery to personnel, all
yeah.
of those.
And this resilience thing, I mean, it's often discussed, but it's rarely done correctly. Rarely do people actually spend it, you know. And I had a lady, you know, Lori Silverman, come on one of my shows, and she's all about building, kind of doing strategic thinking and turning. And then of course I'm a planning guy, so we run very parallel with each other. But you know, she was saying, hey, you got to think about multiple different scenarios of the future world. And I think
Right,
that's what business owners should be doing, is modeling. You
right.
know, what if people just snap back to work, right? Okay, well, that's one business. What if people are hesitant to go to large spaces? And I know friends that are older, that are immunocompromised, and they're just saying, hey, I'm in no
Not going.
hurry. I'm in no hurry to go back, right? And
Right.
I may be dining from home for a long time, right? And I may not be going to sporting events, right? So there's some portion of the population, they're going to be a long-term, you know, massive change, you know, and everything in between, right? So you got to kind of do a model of, and what if there's a recurrence, right? What if this thing gets bad again in the fall or the winter?
Yeah,
Um,
I would pick at least three models
yeah,
and actually um, work through those and do, you know, scenarios that you can adjust and see exactly how you would handle each, rather than reacting when you find one of those scenarios is actually occurring. So it's
right.
better to have been proactive and be able to say, okay, if the economy snaps right back, here's how we're going to work with it.
Yeah,
If it's over time or it's pockets, which is now where we're saying that it could be in the countries where certain pockets come back before others. How does that affect you and your business? Um, and so, you know, we often talk about having a one-trick pony where you have one automated system and use that in building your business. But you also, if that one-trick pony can no longer work, you've got to have had another that you can
yeah.
go to.
Exactly. You've got to build that. And I think that resiliency testing that you're alluding to is very important. And, you know, if you know these different possible outcomes, you can then figure out what the common denominators are, what you do need in your business for sure. And you can also start tracking to what's different between them. But I think
Well,
you
and
got
don't
to,
be afraid to ask either. The thing
yeah,
is, you know, as you know, we're not experts in every area. So it's important for us to get to, you know, someone who is in finance or legal or is a
yeah.
good strategic planner. And,
Well,
you know, put together that's the sort of think tank for yourself so that you then have other people outside looking in at your model to make sure you're pivoting in a
well,
sustainable way.
I think that's one thing you and I do, and I want to welcome anybody who's seeing this to reach out to me or Ann, because one thing we are working on is putting business owners together. I mean, so not only do you need the right professionals around you, you know, CFOs, the accountants, the, you know, lawyers, whatever pieces you need to support your business. It's also good to run scenarios with other business owners. And it's probably something, you know, you can only do to a limited extent back at the office, right? You can hang out with your employees and talk about the what ifs, but there's a lot of stuff that's off limits with them that you probably don't want to be discussing. So, you know, if you're listening to this and you want to talk about how can you grow, you know, reach out to me and Ann, because we're working on putting business owners together into
Right.
groups to facilitate these discussions, to allow them to support each other. And I think that is critical to get out of the model. And, you know, you're going to have to make some hard decisions, right, Ann? I mean, you may be talking about realigning your business,
Right.
and you want to communicate that to your team at the right time, but you're going to freak out a lot of your team members if you go in and say, hey, I don't think our business model works anymore. What should we be doing?
Yeah,
That
there
may be
needs to,
something where you would plant the seeds outside the company and then bring the
with a
information,
solution. It's much easier to come in,
or at least with a
have to
proposal.
change your vision,
Right.
and then explain it to your
Yeah, at
employees.
least come in with a developed proposal, right? So rather than coming in and saying to your employees, "Oh my God, there's a fire! There's a fire! There's a fire! Help me put it out." Come in and say, "Hey, there's a fire, and here's my plan for putting it out. Do you
Correct.
have alternate plans? Do you have alternate ideas?" It would be a lot more calming, and I think
Right.
there's a way to facilitate these discussions. So I think
Right.
a lot of people have to make these hard decisions. Um,
But it's so much nicer when you have a couple of other business owners who are either going through the same thing, have gone through something similar,
yeah,
and they can be in different. That's one of the things we find in this entrepreneur to CEO journey is that people go through the same stages, and it's not necessarily how much revenue or capital you have. It's how much, it's where you are in your journey. And so
yeah,
it's
and
like to put them together.
right. And for those listeners that aren't as familiar about our entrepreneur CEO journey, we've broken it into stages, right? And we found that as we've tracked our clients and the people we've read about and the studies we've done over the years, going from being an entrepreneur, just having an idea and starting a business around a concept to being a full CEO of a business that runs itself, where you're very separated from the business and you're not involved in the day to day and the business runs itself, there's stages along the way. And what stage you're in, is going to be part of this. And honestly, for some businesses, you may be moving stages, right? So you may be in a situation where you need to go back and start a new concept because you built a model that doesn't work. That's perfectly okay.
Right.
But you may need some support around that.
Yeah, and we're really talking about stability all along.
Yep,
If you're no longer stable, in the particular model, then we may need to backtrack and get stability back so that you can then build on that. It's the difference between building on sand and building on rock. You want to have a stable foundation.
exactly. So we'll be furthering this conversation in upcoming videos. Make sure you're subscribed to our Journey to CEO YouTube channel, where we'll be posting other videos. Of course, check out me, R. Shawn McBride, Ann Gatty. We're both on LinkedIn. We've been posting a lot. We've got our book, Entrepreneur to CEO, coming up later this year. I want to get more of these conversations going. We really love your comments, so drop anything non-confidential in the comment box. And also feel free to reach out directly to me or Ann if we can help you with your journey and help you get repositioned. We'd love to help some businesses think about where they are, think about where they're going, get some fresh thinking in there to really grow. So thanks for joining us today. Everybody pat yourself on the back,
Thanks,
and
guys.
we will be talking soon.
Good talking.